Title: The Bitter Winds of Oyo. Chapter 1: The Dawn of Darkness. The year was 1789 in the bustling town of Oyo, one of the prominent kingdoms in what is now known as Nigeria. The sun was just rising over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the expansive savanna. The marketplace was already alive with the sounds of traders selling their wares, women with colorful wrappers, shouting their prices, children running barefoot, and the scent of roasted plantains and freshly cut yam filling the air. Oyo was a place of prosperity, a city renowned for its military strength, art, and culture. Adewale, a young man in his early 20s, walked through the crowded streets, greeting everyone he passed. Known for his strength and agility, he was often called upon for wrestling matches during the town's festivals. He had dreams of becoming one of the famous warriors of Oyo, like his ancestors before him. But fate had other plans. As Adewale reached the edge of the market, he noticed something unusual. A crowd had gathered near the palace gates, their voices filled with fear and anger. He pushed through the throng of people until he could see what they were looking at: strangers with pale skin, wearing strange clothes made of wool and silk. They were flanked by the local chiefs, who seemed nervous, their eyes darting between the strangers and the people. These strangers were the Europeans, the so-called white men who had arrived with their ships laden with trinkets and guns. At first, they came under the guise of traders, exchanging goods like salt and spices. But it soon became clear that they were interested in something far more valuable than spices. They wanted people. Chapter 2: The Shackles of Slavery. The white men had been coming to the shores of West Africa for years, taking people from their villages, either through trade with local chiefs or by outright kidnapping. They would load these captured men, women, and children onto their ships, chained together in the dark, stinking hulls, to be sold in the Americas as slaves. Adewale had heard stories of the white men's ships from travelers. How the Europeans would raid villages in the dead of night, burning huts and taking anyone they could find. How the captured people were chained together, crammed into the belly of their massive ships where disease and death were constant companions. He had always thought those stories were distant, something that happened to other people, in other places. But now, they were at the gates of Oyo, and the fear was palpable. Among the Europeans was a man named Captain Thomas, a seasoned slave trader who had made a fortune from the human cargo he sold in the Caribbean. To him, the people of Africa were nothing more than commodities, pieces on a ledger that would bring him profit. He was ruthless and knew how to exploit the rivalries between local chiefs to his advantage. Chief Olewale, one of the most influential chiefs in Oyo, had already struck a deal with Captain Thomas. In exchange for muskets, gunpowder, and textiles, the chief agreed to supply slaves to the Europeans. Many of these slaves were prisoners of war, captured during the numerous skirmishes between the neighboring tribes. But when the demand grew, anyone could be taken, even the freeborn, even those like Adewale. Chapter 3: Betrayal and Capture. Life continued as usual in Oyo for several months, but the shadow of the white men loomed large. Adewale was worried. He had seen how men from neighboring towns had vanished, only to be rumored to have been sold off to the white men. He had heard the whispered stories of betrayal, how some chiefs had turned against their own people for wealth and power. One evening, as the town prepared for a harvest festival, Adewale and his sister Amina were gathering firewood near the outskirts of the village. The laughter of children playing in the field and the music of the drummers filled the air. But as they reached the forest edge, a group of men sprang upon them. They were not strangers, they were soldiers of Chief Olawale. Adewale tried to fight them off, but they were too many. Amina screamed, but her cries were muffled as one of the soldiers clamped his hand over her mouth. The siblings were bound and dragged through the forest to a clearing where Captain Thomas and his men were waiting. Adewale's heart sank as he realized the truth. They had been betrayed by their own people, sold for a few muskets and kegs of gunpowder. The captain examined them like livestock, checking their teeth and muscles, before nodding in approval. Adewale and Amina were thrown into a cart, shackled to other captives, and driven towards the coast. Chapter 4: The Middle Passage. The journey to the coast was long and arduous. Adewale lost track of time as they were forced to march for days with little food or water. At night, they were chained together, with the sound of the ocean waves crashing in the distance. The captives were a mix of men, women, and children from different tribes, all sharing the same fate. Some had been captured in war, others kidnapped from their homes. When they finally reached the coast, Adewale saw the infamous door of no return, a narrow passage leading to the waiting ships. This was the last time he would see his homeland. The captives were herded like cattle into the belly of the ship, where they were chained to wooden planks, shoulder to shoulder, with barely enough room to move. The stench was unbearable, a mix of sweat, vomit, and human waste. Disease spread quickly in the cramped quarters, and the screams of the dying filled the darkness. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage, was a death sentence for many. But Captain Thomas was indifferent to their suffering. He only cared about the profit he would make once they reached the slave markets of the New World.